when you look through a window on a sunny day and you can see the particles floating in the sunbeam, those are dust particles, but what is it that's in that dust? 4 decades plus of experience shows us that on an average, about 15% of air quality problems affect directly somebody's respiratory problem. The vast majority of most airborne contaminants are very, very small. They're non-visible. And that's why without the testing, you often don't even realize. Now, for one, that might be simply systemic inflammation and pain. For somebody else, it's passing through the blood-brain barrier. And now we have, we always say that you can't be healthy living in a sick home. And very often, you don't even realize sometimes that you're living in a sick home without doing some kind of a...
Terry, it's great to have you here. And this may be the most powerful podcast that we do because I discovered myself how important our internal air quality in our homes is, which is what you specialize in. And my number one pillar is oxygen. But we know oxygen isn't really what we're focused on. It's air quality. And within that air content is oxygen at roughly 21% of what we breathe, with nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and other things. But it's so important to have you here sharing what we're going to be talking about today, because we spend roughly 90% of our lives inside, and yet the air quality inside is much less of a good quality than outside. We're not protected inside. We're actually more exposed. And so what can we do to increase the quality that we're living in? But before we do that, I want you to tell us a little bit about you. Growing up, what were your dreams? How did you get into being such a specialist in air quality? And, what's been your journey to this point?
Sure. Well, I appreciate it, Dan, and thank you for having me here today. From a young age, I always enjoyed science, learning, anything that really had to do with health. And I thought, if I'm going to do something for the rest of my life, I wanted to do something that I was going to have a lot of fun with and could help a lot of people along the way. And so it's been a real journey. We've been doing this now for 41 plus years. Anything really dealing with air quality, water quality, environmental toxins, mainly in homes. We do office technologies as well, but really it's to try to help somebody to understand, are you in harm's way? We always say that you can't be healthy living in a sick home. And very often, you don't even realize sometimes that you're living in a sick home without doing some kind of an assessment, a testing process. So that's where the past 4+ decades of my life has been, is really helping people to understand, are they living in a sick home? And then helping them through that process. Because it's more than just really understanding what the toxins are. You really need to understand, why are they there? Where are they at in the home? And then, of course, from that, you can understand what's the next best thing to do to actually do some type of corrective action. So you can't solve a problem until you know what the problem is.
For sure, which is where I actually met you at a health convention and happened to be walking past your booth. And I had never addressed the thought process of quality air, because I always thought I would feel sick if something was wrong. And we'll go into it a little bit more about when you came in and tested my home, and pretty shocking. So stay listening to what really happened. I thought I was living in a great environment. But tell me some of the effects that people live through, and do people actually die from living in bad environments within their home?
Well, unfortunately, the ramifications of breathing in bad air quality and even being subject to bad water quality are quite profound. From an air quality standpoint, very often somebody will think, well, I couldn't have an air quality problem because I don't have a breathing problem. And logically, that makes sense. But our 4 decades plus of experience shows us that on an average, about 15% of air quality problems affect directly somebody's respiratory problem. So, in other words, they either have a scratchy throat, a tightness in the chest, an asthma-like symptom. But another 85%, you wouldn't even put two and two together that this air quality problem is what's causing these other issues. Because the vast majority of most airborne contaminants are very, very small. They're non-visible. And that's why without the testing, you often don't even realize they're there. But as you basically breathe in these ultra-fine, small contaminants, yes, they do go to the lungs, but they then go through the lung tissue into the bloodstream. And now they're simply going to flow to the least course of resistance or the most challenged area of our body. Now, for one, that might be simply systemic inflammation and pain. For somebody else, it's passing through the blood-brain barrier, and now we have neurological implications. Now, it could be as simple as I can't fall asleep. I can't stay asleep. I have brain fog during the day. Now, who would ever think that that would be directly correlated to an air quality problem? But once again, science, research, and medical studies are clearly showing us that that is the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, I did a bunch of studying before we jumped on to this call because I wanted to understand it to a deeper level than I thought I already understood it, knowing how important oxygen is to our system. We know if you're not taking oxygen into your system between 5 and 15 minutes, you're brain dead. But when I researched into it and understood the penetration of the toxins through the respiratory system into our blood flow, right? We actually get into the blood that can cause, it's the number one cause that I read of blood-related cancers. How serious is this really? Because when I started reading about the inflammation, the effect on our heart health, on our brain health, on the neurological system, this is critical. This is one of the top 5 effects on our health in anything in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, we're watching what foods we're eating. We're watching what supplements that we're taking or not. And then, because you can't see what's in the air, it almost becomes this situation where you're not really thinking about it. The level of importance goes down. But once again, what we clearly see is that the science is showing that it is vitally important. You think about the amount of toxins that we're bringing in, it is just incredible. And it's not just what I might call dust. When you look through a window on a sunny day and you can see the particles floating in the sunbeam, those are dust particles. But, what is it that's in that dust? It could be simply pollen and dander, pets, dead skin cells. But at the same time, things that are microbiological, mold, mycotoxins, viruses. Once again, you can't see them, but as you breathe them in, again, they're going to go to where they can get to, and the impact will be wide and varied. This is also why we can have 3, 4, 5 people living in the same home, and yet one person might be saying, get me out of here. This house is killing me. And the other 4 are saying, what are you talking about? We're not noticing anything at all. So the rate at which somebody starts to notice something is quite wide and varied. So right now, science is really giving us a pretty good indicator that about 25% of the general population are considered to be sensitized individuals. So they are going to be impacted, affected, and they will notice things before somebody else does. Then, somebody will go 5, 10 years down the road, have this major health challenge and wondering, hey, doc, how did this all of a sudden just happen? Not really recognizing that, again, it took a period of time. And, our level of exposure is based upon 2 factors. 1, the concentration of the toxins, and 2, the exposure time. It's always about time and intensity. And so if you are not testing your home environment to even understand that you're under threat, do you really want to wait 5 and 10 years to find this out, or today? That's why the timing of testing is so critical. Don't wait till you have the health challenges. Find out early on. We can also have those same 3 or 4 or 5 people in a home, and one's experiencing inflammation and pain. Somebody else is experiencing neurological symptoms, as I mentioned before. Somebody else is having cardiovascular problems. Again, same home, same toxins, but because these toxins are going to try to find the weakest link in the body or the most challenged areas to go because they can. That's why you can see such a profound difference from person to person, yet still quite impactful.
One of the things that doing the studying, realizing the impact on a baby's brain, because we just think of it as babies just grow up, we're healthy when we're young, and then when we age, suddenly we start feeling problems, and that's when we got to take care of it. But I was shocked to find out that the content of the air, especially radon, and we'll get into different things in a minute, but how the neurological effect on a baby living in a contaminated environment in their home, and you think about it, they're spending even more time in those areas than we are as humans when we go out and leave the baby at home. But it brings on potential diseases at a much younger age. It brings on neurological disease, everything from Alzheimer's, dementia, because of the impact of a baby living in contaminated air that, like you said earlier, doesn't even come out till years later. We wonder why suddenly we're sick. What do you find is the biggest effect that cleaning your air and your water has on people's health? Is there one specific issue that you've noticed a quick change in the recovery?
Well, so generally just the how somebody feels. Because the problem is when you are physically challenged by toxins, your brain knows that you're under threat, which is why you see such a high level of anxiety, sleep problems. The brain knows you're in danger, even if you kind of like consciously aren't recognizing it. I actually call it and kind of coined the term environmental PTSD. Think about the military veteran that's been on the battlefield for months or years. Now, again, it clearly doesn't get that much more stressful than that. Now, 5 years later, they retire. They're sitting at home in their lazy boy recliner. Their spouse drops a book in the other room, and they're still diving for cover. Now, clearly, we know that they're not in danger, but why is the brain still responding that way? It believes that the threat either is there or may still be there. And that's kind of what happens is that when you're in a home or even an office setting, but typically you're home more than any place, when you have these toxins on an ongoing basis, the brain recognizes that threat is there and the threat is real. And so you keep on coming home to the same home, and the brain's thinking, okay, I've kind of let you know that you're in danger here. I've kind of given you a red alert. I'm, raising up your adrenaline. I'm raising up your anxiety. I'm trying to let you know this threat is here, but you keep on coming home day after day. And so now we have the physiological impact of the air quality contaminants, but we also have now this neurological impact. And this is why it's so important to do the testing. If you're not feeling well in your own home, or maybe you go on vacation and you say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And then you come back home and you're back to feeling bad again. Well, that's giving you some indication that the likelihood that something's going on really is. Now, when you test, you'll truly understand if you do a comprehensive enough test and you want to check the entire home, you want to check all of the rooms, not just a room or two, and you really want to check it for a broad spectrum of contaminants. So, for example, very often a patient or a client will come to us and say, my doctor has recommended I get my air tested for mold. And again, I get it. They've probably done a blood test or urine analysis and found some indication of mold. So clearly, they're thinking it's got to be a mold problem. From our experience, it could be a mold problem, or there can be a whole list of other toxins that the body's having a much more difficult time with. And so what happens is that sometimes the mold is not getting out. It's not getting detoxified at the same rate maybe these other toxins are. So by the testing, we'll truly understand, first of all, is there a problem? Then, if there is, what are those problems? Is it due to simply dust and particulates? Is it VOC chemicals, which you can't see? Or is it microbiological? And once again, 90% of mold problems that we come across are those that you can't see. So really it depends on the type of contaminant and that individual's ability to detoxify or handle it. You mentioned about the babies. The reason that babies are such a big problem, or moms that are carrying those babies through pregnancy, you have a much smaller body weight. Remember when I mentioned about time and intensity? Well, an adult at 150 pounds is not going to have the same impact as a small baby, at 10 or 15 pounds, and the duration. Think about how fast a baby is breathing, how fast they're growing, how fast this metabolizing of these contaminants is going on. So you can't just look at somebody that says, I'm in this house, I feel okay, so it must be okay. It's really about the individual, and you also don't know their previous toxic burden. So if you've had somebody that maybe grew up in a moldy home, and or maybe they just moved from a moldy home, and they come into this what should be a pristine home, maybe a new built construction, you can't always based upon what's going on now. So the testing helps to identify, is this an ongoing problem in the home that I need to be aware of? Or is my reaction from something that happened previous? It kind of takes the guesswork out of the equation.
One thing, and again, you're really dealing with my top two pillars, which is air quality and hydration, right? Oxygen and hydration. But there's another part that's so critical that we know the world is suffering from. And again, from some of the things that we spoke about before when I met you at the convention, you talked about the inability to have good sleep. And you touched on it a little bit already, where the brain is at work because it realizes it's under fire. Tell us a little bit more about the effect that poor air can have on sleep, because there's so many people that are suffering from sleep deprivation, but they're not fixing the environment.
Right. And it's not just a single night of not sleeping, because it turns out to be multiple nights, multiple weeks, multiple months. For some, it's years. And then wondering why you're not feeling well. Well, if we're not getting the sleep, we're not getting the rest, we're not getting the repair, and we're also not getting the detoxification. Because that's really when most of the detoxification occurs for both our brain and our body, is during those sleep cycles. So what we find when somebody has been subject to these toxins, if you breathe them in, again, if it does pass the blood-brain barrier, which many do, it creates what's called an excitotoxic chemical reaction. In other words, the brain's on fire. It's highly inflamed from the constant hit and hit and hit of all these toxins. Well, if left long enough, that process would actually kill you. But the brain's not going to let that happen. So it's trying to figure out, how do I keep you alive long enough to figure out what's going on? So as these toxic chemical reactions are going on, very often you might be able to maybe smell something. Maybe it could be some chemicals in the home, or some gasoline from traffic around the outside of your home. Whatever it may be, your brain will actually start to shut down your ability to smell and taste these contaminants, so that excitotoxic chemical reaction is not occurring in the brain. Now, that clearly is a good thing to keep you alive. Unfortunately, just because you don't smell them or taste them, you're still breathing them in. So the body is still taking on this hit. And so now we have this disconnect between what the body is taking in and what the brain is recognizing. And this is where this disconnect turns into, again, issues of, hey, I'm trying to give you a red alert. You're not listening. And so now we don't really have that deep reparative sleep. You've heard of that term before, that phrase, sleeping with one eye open. I'll go back to our military veterans. When they're sleeping on the cot, or at least so-called sleeping, they have one eye open. They're trying to be able to hear that enemy coming, 200 yards away, not 20 feet away. Well, our brains are wired in that same way. When we start, recognizing these toxins, red alert. It's trying to let us know what's going on. So that's not a bad thing, but when it continues happening day after day, now the brain is starting to run on adrenaline. It's in reactive mode. It's fight or flight. We cannot be healthy and relaxed and healing at the same time we're in red alert or in fight or flight. So, another reason why it's so critical to understand, are we living in a sick home or not? If you are, you need to address it because your health depends on it.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at the rooms that we spend the most time in or the environment we spend the most time, I would have to say probably 95% of people spend more time in their bedroom than anywhere else. And with all the studies that I've done on sleep and brain health specifically because of my own brain issues, if you can't get that rest at night and sleep, get to your REM sleep, get to your deep sleep, get to those levels where the brain now is free, like you said, to um, get rid of the toxins, recover and heal for the next day's adventures, we're living at a subpar constant. And the danger is the brilliance of the body is it can adapt, it's resilient to what we're putting up with, but it may not be able to actually take us to the next level. What percentage of homes or offices that you go and test, and I know you've done thousands upon thousands, what percentage are actually clean homes?
Very small. In fact, I would say on an average, 10, maybe 15%. So a better way of saying that for the listeners here is that, about 85% of people that are living in their homes are living in a home with a potential environmental toxic problem. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone should be, selling their house and moving and finding a new place to live. But it certainly, at that kind of percentage, makes sense to understand your environment, address it. Just because you move doesn't mean that you're moving to a better place. You're moving to a different place. Very often people say, well, Terry, I've lived in this home for 50 years. Why now? Why am I experiencing these health challenges now? So I'll ask them, well, in the past 50 years that you've lived there, did you change your heating and cooling system? Yeah, I did that about 16 years ago. Okay. How about a new roof? Yeah, that was 10 years ago. How about new windows, new doors? And of course, keeps on giving these time levels. But what I share with them is you've lived at the same address for 50 years, not the same home. Because as you change either structural or mechanical things, either within that home or the very home itself, or you get new carpeting or new windows. I mean, clearly those are good things for having, improved energy efficiency. But at the same boat, we're kind of buttoning ourselves up so tight in this home that the home is not breathing as it did in homes that were built in the 50s and 60s. They were structurally pretty strong back then, but you had, air that was traveling in through, windows that weren't so good or doors that weren't sealed so well. Today, especially in the homes that were built in the 90s, the 2000s, and beyond, they're built around energy efficiency. In fact, the theory and the concept there in today's building market is build the home tight. What we try to educate a client to do is build the home tight, but ventilate it right. We want air exchange. If we're not getting air exchange, where the things that are in the home have an opportunity to off gas and be sent out of the home, and then air from outside has a chance to come in, if we don't get that air exchange happening, you're not going to have a healthy home. Because even when you make a home that is that tight, everyone from with mold always used to look at where's the water pipe that burst? Where's the water that's running in from the river outside? I mean, that's what everyone thinks, but the reality is if you have a home that is either built tight or it's not ventilating correctly, even the moisture from showering, bathing, washing clothes, your dishwasher, that now is enough moisture to actually create or magnify a mold problem. So once again, you're doing everything that everybody does. Why is that we're starting to see more and more of these health issues coming on play? Mainly because again, our building construction is different. And even if you had this home from 50 years ago, you didn't just leave it like that. You've done new things, or you've improved the way it looks, the way it functions. So you can't just go by what things look like or I've lived here for 50 years, why now? There's definitely a reason why. That's the beauty on the testing. If you test correctly, again, checking for a full battery of contaminants, checking all levels of the home, checking all rooms, not only for the contaminants, but you want to check for conditions. So, for example, if I did a test on a home and I gave you this list of contaminants and said, have a nice day, you're going to be saying, well, yeah, but what does this mean? I mean, are these toxins, harmful to me and to my family? Or is it, something else that's going on that is allowing these toxins to be there in the first place? So we're looking for temperature, we're looking for humidity, we're looking for carbon dioxide. These are things that start to give us an indicator of what's really going on in the home. We utilize laser air quality monitors and we go room to room to room. Very often, many companies that test air are checking for a room or two. Well, if you're missing 90% plus of all the other rooms in the house, think about how much you're missing. That we always tell somebody, we don't test for as many things as we do and as many different ways that we do so that we find something. It's so that we don't miss something. Because it is so easy to miss if you don't do the right test.
Yeah, it's interesting. When there's a fire outside, and I live in Southern California, we have some big fires that go through, we shut the windows, we keep the contaminated air out. We often are first notified of a fire by the smell before we even hear about it on the news. Then we look outside, you see it, so we shut and we think we're safe. I just had a scrape test done in my house, and you know about this because you came and tested my house. But I had an independent company come in. The last time we had smoke come in was 5 years ago. They scraped my roof. There's still smoke contamination. Now, this goes down to the fact that air outside can often be a much better quality of air than what we got trapped inside, but we think we're safer because we think the contaminant's out. Again, fascinating that what we're led to believe, like you said, we shut down the smell receptors because we live in it. And so the body stops it going, basically dumbs it or numbs us down. But one thing I want to bring up, you said you come in and you test people's homes. Well, we'll come on to my home. You don't actually come in. It was a fascinating process. Explain how that process, because you don't have to show up. There's no one goes through the house. You do this all over the country. And I was shocked at how simple it was to do. Tell me, explain to everyone, what was it that I went through? And we'll come to the results in a minute.
Sure. Well, early on in my career and that of my team, we would go into these homes and do all the sampling. And then we would bring all those samples back to our lab and go ahead and do a complete analysis. And we would always find out what those contaminants were. Unfortunately for us, we wouldn't find out about how much danger that we were actually in going into that home, doing the sampling until the analysis was complete. Too late at that point. And again, going into multiple homes every day for weeks and months and years on end, you can imagine the toll that that would take. Quite a number of years ago, through my career, there was a particular given day that I went into 4 homes, and each of those homes was about a 2-hour sampling and analysis process. Now, the homes look beautiful. You would have never guessed that there was an air quality problem. And so 4 homes, 2 hours each, about 8 hours of exposure. As I'm driving home, I knew I wasn't feeling very well. And as I got home, I felt even worse. So I went into the house, told my wife, I says, I'm not really sure what's going on, but I said, I'm not feeling well. Maybe let's just go take a walk around the neighborhood and I'll shake it off. I got about 10 feet to the end of my driveway and said, I can't make it. I says, I don't know what's going on, but I says, it's not good. I says, let's go in, sit down and maybe have some dinner. Took about 2 bites and I'm telling her to call 911. At that moment in time, my heart went into full atrial fibrillation. My blood pressure was plummeting. My heart rate all over the place. I was not good. And so my wife knew it was not good when I told her to call 911. So ambulance comes, and on my way there, they're talking to the ER docs, and they're not looking very happy about what was going on with me at that point. I spent 3 days basically recovering in the intensive care. What I later learned is that I had brought in so much mold, so many chemicals, so many toxins and contaminants, it just put my body in overload. It hit my heart, it hit my central nervous system, it hit my adrenals. And so what I later learned was these 4 homes were homes that were purchased by investors from banks that had these homes foreclosed on. Now, while the banks had these homes, they had all the power turned off. And so there was sump pumps there that would pump the water out, no power to run the sump pump. So water had literally went up 3, 4, and 5 feet high in these basements. Then the setting for months. So all this moisture, of course, turned into just vast amounts of mold, which turned into mycotoxins, which turned into chemicals. Now, these groups of investors, basically, they had to have our certifications and approvals to get the home sold, but they didn't share any of this with us at all. And so I later learned too that they went in there and they cosmetically made everything look really, really great in the home, even by my account. Unfortunately, they didn't remediate anything. They did not remove any of the toxins, just new wall covering, new carpeting. They drained the water out. So everything looked wonderful. 3 days later, as I'm just getting out of the ER and intensive care, I knew this was a problem. And I knew that me going into these homes and my team was not a good situation. So that was one of the impetuses of basically us creating this PureAir, PureWater kind of virtual remote testing process. It was a means of being able to have us send the testing system out to a homeowner, experienced or not. All they had to do was take these devices out of the case, place them around the home, all levels, all rooms, and it was going to be done for 48 hours. So 2 solid days of sampling processes without me being subject to what may or may not be in that home. At the end of that 2-day time frame, all the homeowner does is put the devices back into that case, and we actually provided the shipping both to them and back. Now, once we get it back, now we go ahead and do the lab analysis. Now I can tell you, is there a problem? What are those problems? Where are they at? Why are they happening? Or likely at least. And now, without having 1 foot of myself or my team being placed in harm's way. So that was the big reason. The second reason was, think about in that virtual remote process, think about how many more people that today we're able to help that before was simply how many hours do I have in a day? Now we literally help thousands and thousands and really help them to discover not only are they in harm's way from contaminants, but again, what are the conditions that are going on in that home? I can have 10 homes side by side, maybe built in the same era, maybe the same furnishings, the same everything. Why is it that one home can be very, very toxic and the other ones are really not a problem? Once again, it's not only the toxins that are in the home, what are the conditions that are, going on around that home or going on within the home that's allowing it to be a bigger problem? That's why I developed that testing process. Got about 8 years of my life of that testing process invention so that we could really help more people and yet at the same time not put me in harm's way. Because if you lived that journey that I went through, you'd never wish it upon your worst enemy.
Yeah, and again, what you've created, imagine if people had moved into that home. And like you said, not everyone may be affected or as sensitive to begin with, but over time it could come in and we don't know what we're living in. So I was surprised at how simple and how elaborate at the same time your system was when I tested the home. And we'll get into some of the findings because it was pretty shocking. But what was beautiful was how simple it was to set up, and then that you collected information over 48 hours. It wasn't just what's going on at this time of day, because maybe I open all the windows up. I know when we did the testing, we kept the windows closed because we want to make sure that we're getting a true evaluation of what's inside the home and not, otherwise I might as well test outside. But I was so surprised when the findings came back, the depth of knowledge that you were able to attain. In some were 30-second tests and some were 48-hour tests, what we would do and record, and very easy to do. But even more shocking was the amount of impact, things that I had no idea that I thought were out of my way were creating in the environment. So I'm going to go through some of these and I want you to explain each one as I bring them up.
Sure.
I have a long driveway where I park cars in there. I reverse the car in, my side doors open, the exhaust fumes are going in, but I'm not aware, or I wasn't aware, of how much of a car fume coming into the home can affect. Tell us about that.
Well, once again, as I mentioned, that many homes today are not breathing well. They're not ventilating properly. And some would term that a home that's under negative pressure. And there's many reasons why that can happen, but I do find it very, very often. And when you have a home that's negatively pressurized, what you'll always know is that whatever toxins or contaminants that are in the home, they're going to continue to concentrate. Things that are outside the home are going to get drawn in. So our level of toxins, again, don't get better over time, they get worse. This is one of the reasons why when somebody is testing for mold, very often they'll bring in a mold inspector. And the traditional kind of normal standard is to take a mold cassette. It's about the size of a golf ball. They hook it up to an air pump and they'll run it for 5 minutes. And then they'll check usually a room or two. And then they will also do what's called a control sample. In other words, they're going to take a sample of the air that's outside as well. Now, the theory here, as the laboratory gets these analysis here, they're going to start looking and comparing the inside samples to the outside samples. And once again, the theory is if I have more mold spores in the home than outside, that's supposed to be indicative of a mold problem. Or if I have different types of mold in the home than outside, that's supposed to be indicative of a mold problem. Now, the analytical procedure by the laboratories is spot on. They're doing a great job. The problem is in the sample methodology. So the first thing is you're not going to find all the mold that you have in your house in a 5-minute sampling. So whether it be the little small cassette that hooks up to an air pump, or very often you'll have the little Petri dishes. They're easy to get. And then you take the top off, you set it on a shelf for 5 minutes, an hour, a couple hours, even if it's for a day. There's no control mechanism. In other words, you're waiting for the contaminant to fall out of the air at the exact proper moment in time so that it gets into that dish so you can find out what you're going to find. There's too many flaws in the sample taking procedure. The other issue is that those types of mold processes are looking for larger spores. We find that on an average, 80 to 90% of most of the mold we're finding is mold that's in a very, very small form, invisible. And so now you don't see anything in the home, so you don't even sometimes recognize that there's a mold problem. And the traditional mold tests don't find that. And mold is another tricky thing. Mold knows how to be around for a long time, even when you try to do things like killing it. So, for example, somebody says, oh, I saw some mold on my bathroom tile and I shot some bleach on it and I scrubbed it down and it looks great now. 2 days later, it's back. It's because bleach does not kill mold. Bleach makes mold go clear. It's a natural defense mechanism for mold that when it feels threatened, it camouflages itself, goes clear. And now, once the bleach residue goes away, the mold says, oh, they really don't know how to kill me. And it comes back with a vengeance. So that's why, again, mold can be around for a long time frame. Also, if you're looking for mold spores, and the mold is in a condition that's allowing the mold to actively grow, now the mold will convert from a spore into a mold chemical. And you're trying to find the mold in your test as a spore, but if it's in a chemical, you're not going to find what you're not looking for. So all of these things are so critical. The timing process, like I said, 48 hours, we're going to find things in 48 hours that you don't find in 5 minutes. And, you mentioned about how we found things in different areas of your home. So if you just check in the air with a traditional mold spore test, you're also not going to find it in other forms or other ways. So for example, it is good to check surfaces for mold. That mold will often fall down into dust because that's a food source for the mold to be. But if the mold is threatened and it's in a chemical form and you're not checking the chemical form, once again, you're not going to find it. So we like to check for mold on surfaces. Then we go ahead and we look for mold in the air. And then we check for the mold chemicals, which can even be inside your walls. Now, I've watched many companies go in there and literally just destroy a home by ripping down the walls and tearing down, structural situations before they even knew if there was a problem. I like doing this type of testing I'm referring to discover, is there a problem and does it warrant going further? So in that situation, you're really going to know, do you have the problem or not? You're not going to just assume that it's not there because you didn't find it in one form.
So explain to me, and because I don't understand this, and I'm sure people watching would love to know, you talk about mold, mold spores, and mold chemical. Explain to me, because I know when I see mold, I see it and I know what it is. We were taught black mold is the worst, and yet I'm finding out that it's actually not the worst, the black mold. Explain to me the transition and what is a mold chemical?
Sure. So you never really want to make the determination that you're not in harm's way if the mold is not black. You might see mold that's green, purple, orange, brown, and every other color, under the sun. The color of the mold that you see on a surface very often is not the mold itself. Very often, what you're seeing is the staining from the feces of the mold. And that coloration very often is based upon what was the mold feeding on. So, was it feeding on wood? Was it feeding on paper? Was it feeding on vegetation? So you can get different colors from that standpoint. So usually when somebody's referring to that toxic, black mold, they're referring to a particular mold called Stachybotrys, which very often is in a black coloration situation. But, all molds to a degree, based upon that individual sensitivity, have the risk of being toxic to everybody. It's all about time and intensity. If you have 2 spores floating in the air, clearly that risk factor is going to be much, much lower than if I find 8,000 spores. And then how long are you being subject to them? So in the test process we do, we'll do surface samples. The surface samples are going to be the mold that often has, again, fallen out of the air and landed on surfaces and very often land into dust. That way they can continue feeding on and growing from. Now, if mold has the right conditions, like the right food sources, the right moisture level, and if you're not bothering it too much, it says, hey, I like it here. I got food, I got water, no one's bothering me. I'm not leaving. And so now these spores can actually start to convert into another form, more or less either a mycotoxin or a mold chemical. And so again, if you're looking for the spores, you might not find them if you're only doing a spore test and you're not checking for the mold chemicals or the mycotoxins. How you test for them, how you find them, and how you solve them is very different from one to another. So that's why it's very important to test for them all. Now, here's another situation. Let's just say you did all 3 of those, and that's all you did. And you think, okay, well, at least for mold, I know I'm okay. Well, if you have a high chemical level, like what they call VOCs, volatile organic chemicals, now that can be from the paint in your home or new carpeting or maybe new furniture or maybe, a gas can that's out in your garage that every time you open the garage door to go into the house, that gasoline chemical wafts into the home. Well, air is very much like water. So it can only hold so much. So if I gave you a glass of perfectly pure water and told you to put a teaspoon of salt into that water and you stir it up, it dissolves quite easily. If I now told you to put 272 teaspoons of salt into that water, at a certain point in time, somewhere between the first teaspoon and 272, that water becomes saturated. No matter how hard I try, I can't get any more to dissolve into it. Well, air is very much the same way. If I have mold and I have chemicals and I have this and I have that, that air becomes saturated. And sometimes what will happen is that if I have the air saturated with all these VOC chemicals and other particulates, sometimes it crowds the mold out. So a ordinary mold test won't find the mold, but are they not finding it because it really has low numbers or because it's being masked by something else? That's the other reason why you do a full comprehensive test more than what you just assume. Even if a blood test or urine analysis is, again, clearly identifying you have a mold problem, you have to do the full spectrum of testing because you may not find it. Or you might say, now I have a healthy home as far as mold goes, but is it really still a healthy home if you're being subject to all these other toxins? So it's critical that you test for, again, a full battery of contaminants. On an average, our testing is actually looking at over 500 toxins and contaminants. Now, to some, that might sound like a lot. For the individuals that have their health in dire straits and have been trying to figure out what's going on, why do they have these ongoing unresolved health problems? To that individual, they're going to say it was exactly the amount that I needed to do because I finally found out what the Achilles heel was to my health. And it was these toxins that I had no clue were going on in my home.
Yeah, it brings back memories of my test results coming back a couple of weeks ago. And again, I can't emphasize enough, your very first conversation we ever had at the health convention, where we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars trying to get healthier, but walking back in to the problem. One of the things that there were many things, understanding paint that I've had in my garage on the far side of the garage in a cabinet tucked away for 15, maybe 16 years is contaminating my air. The lead that I have on pots that's rusting or I've just thrown out in the garden and left or thought that it's actually pretty because now I'm using it for my, landscaping. All these things come into the home and have a dramatic effect. The aerosol cans, the cleaning equipment that I use. I have a cupboard or had a cupboard. You'll be proud of me. I moved everything out, but had a cupboard full of all the sprays, the cans, the WD-40s, all these things. Explain the dangers of keeping that stuff in the house and what should somebody do if I want to have that stuff, but I don't want it to affect my environment.
Absolutely. So once again, everybody has stuff in their home, whether it be cleaning compounds, cleaning chemicals, disinfectants. We want clean, healthy, safe homes. But very often somebody doesn't realize that, these toxins that are in these chemicals, that are in these disinfectants are having just as much impact on our health as what they're trying to clean or disinfect from. So where you have things in your home often is assuming that it's okay. So, for example, if somebody has a basement and they're storing old paint cans, now they've done a great job. They've hammered those lids on tight. They put those paint cans inside a Tupperware container. They put the Tupperware container inside a Rubbermaid container, thinking that, hey, there's nothing getting out of here. I'm okay. Yet our testing clearly finds these toxins still getting into the air, even though you did a really good job sealing them. That's why they call them VOCs, volatile organic chemicals. They always want to volatilize. They want to aerosolize. They don't want to stay where they've been stored. They want to get away. And the other problem, of course, is if we have paint cans over here and cleaners over here and paint thinner over here and gasoline from the garage, you no longer have these individual toxins and contaminants because they're all mixing and matching, creating new chemicals. So it's not always just the one thing, it's the combination of them. It's the synergy of all of them together. So it's kind of like when you get a blood test and they go over each test individually and they say, well, that's okay, it's in range. That's okay, it's in range. That one's okay in range. The problem is you're not experiencing all of these things in your body individually. It's the synergistic effect of all of them, which clearly paints a much different picture. The same thing goes with toxins in your home. Even if there were an acceptable number of how many, nanograms per liter of gasoline should be in your house, or paint, or toluene, or anything else, again, you don't just have that one toxin. When it starts to mix and match, time and intensity, those numbers are going up. And it's always going to be a much bigger problem than what you assume. So let's say now, okay, thank you, Terry. I've taken them out of my basement and I put them out in the garage. Now I'm okay. Is that correct? No. The problem is, remember how we talked about the home being negatively pressurized, and most are today. So when your garage door opens to go from the garage into the house, remember that old saying, hey, kids, close the door, I'm not heating outside? That would be true if air was leaking out of the home. What we see in the vast majority of homes are things are leaking in. So when you store the gasoline or even parking your car in the garage, like millions of people do, the problem is those petroleum hydrocarbon chemicals are building up, they're concentrating in the garage. Now you open the door to go into the house, it says, hey, here's another path we can go. And how many times do you come into your home from the garage, in a day, in a week, in a month? It doesn't take a lot to have those toxins build up. The other thing with chemicals is that chemicals don't need an open doorway. They can be absorbed right through the drywall of that garage. Or if your garage has an attic access opening. So if you go out to your garage and you look up into the ceiling and you see an access panel or a pull down stairs, this is another direct pathway that those toxins have to get up into the attic. People say, well, what do I care about the attic? I'm not living up there. Well, you might not be. But when the toxins get up into the attic, that now moves over to the attic of the home. And very often on most homes' heating and cooling system, your supply vents that blow hot or cool air, that's actually typically sheet metal or direct ductwork. But most of the time, your return vents are actually the spaces inside your walls that can actually get air back from the attic. And this is why we check every room when we do the testing. I want to understand, is this an isolated room problem or is this a systemic whole house problem? Is it something that somebody dropped or spilled, or is your ventilation system coming into account as to why those things are either there or why they're spreading around everywhere? So once again, if I only gave somebody a list of toxins and contaminants, I mean, it's good information, it's good data, but in it itself, it does not help them to understand where are they at? Why are they there? What steps should I do for corrective action? So when I say good testing and comprehensive, it's not just by how many contaminants I'm testing for, but are you looking at all the other conditions? Are you really understanding the dynamics of what goes on with the heating and cooling system? Are you understanding if somebody says, well, I just had my home insulated and they gave me a lot of insulation, so it should be really, really good? Once again, you've just buttoned that home up a bit more tighter. And so we're going to have less air exchange going on. So yes, you will probably have lower heating and cooling costs, but at what expense? And most of the time, it's at the expense of your health, which is, again, way too valuable and priceless to take that chance.
Sure, yeah, we want to live in a comfortable environment, but we don't know what that environment's creating until we actually get sick. And then if it took us a year to get sick, it can take us 5 years to get healthy. Or if we don't change the environment, we stay there. So with these problems that are going on, and I know my girlfriend Vivian had been to the doctor, got tested, and she had mold in her system. So we came to you and said, we want to test. And we found out we do have mold throughout the house. Some areas I could see a little bit once we started investigating, but I didn't know it was there. And I consider myself very healthy. I consider myself born superhuman. We all are, because our systems will adapt to the environment we're in. But it suddenly made me realize, if I feel this healthy and yet I'm living in this environment, how healthy should I actually be? Because I'm obviously forcing my system to fight something that should be thriving, not striving to survive. Are there, and what are the solutions to allow life to continue in the way that we are used to and enjoy, but correct or improve the environmental air and toxins that we're living in?
Okay. So, and great question. And this is the reason why we do the more comprehensive type testing, not only for the contaminants, but the conditions. So again, many homes have an attached garage. Many homes in those attached garages have a lawnmower, have a car parked there, have a gas can, maybe a LP gas tank for their barbecue grill. I mean, that would be great again if the home was breathing correctly and things were not getting sucked into the home. But unfortunately, we see things are getting drawn into the home. That's why they're concentrating. So in a garage, for example, millions of people are parking their cars in there. Millions of people have things in the garage that really wouldn't be acceptable to have in a home. But we're finding those contaminants in the home anyway. So in that situation there, from a from a corrective action standpoint, many building codes in Canada right now call for what's called a garage exhaust ventilation system. So it allows you to continue parking your car in the garage. It allows you to continue to have your lawnmower or gas can or whatever else you have out there. But it takes the fumes, the chemicals, and it vents them to the outside. So, for example, in a bathroom, you take a shower, you take a bath, you know the mirrors are going to steam up. What do? You turn the bathroom exhaust fan on and the steam goes away. So everybody's familiar with the concept. They just don't always implement it in other areas of the home where there could be a bigger air quality problem. And so in the States, this is starting to become more commonplace as well. But it's going to take a number of years before it's a mandatory code situation. And if your home was built in the past, they don't require you to go back and now implement this. So these are things that we discovered during our testing process. And if we discover them, now I can give you clear direction. Simply giving somebody a report with a bunch of contaminants and a bunch of bad news helps no one. But this is why we developed in our process a means of being able to give you guidance, giving you direction, giving you these corrective action options. And these corrective action options are not about you got to move, you got to tear the house down, you got to rip all your walls down. And again, I know that there are companies that will do that, but really, before you get to that point, there's a whole lot more things that you can do easier, faster, and certainly more cost efficient, and certainly a lot less impactful structurally and mechanically. So we'll always have some guidance as to what to do. But as I said earlier in the program, you can't solve a problem until you know what the problem is.
Yeah, that's what I was saying as you're talking, all these things are going through my head, and I can imagine that someone listening in is a little overwhelmed because we're used to living the way we do, and yet we don't even know there's a problem there. But what's the health effect? I'm excited with the changes that I'm incorporating to see what's going to happen with my health, especially my brain health, that I believe is the center power of our healing. Even though we have our immune system, it's still governed by the messaging going to the brain and the brain sending out where we're going to be. And the cost to know is invaluable because over the years, you could keep trying everything. That we get so many people that tell us, do this, do this, do this, but we don't actually test the environment. What advice would you give to anybody? Actually, let me say that again. We need to know what we're living in. Again, I've spoken at so many events and presented at so many health conventions or biohacking events, and everyone's got a solution for a certain problem. But you were the first person that came in and said, we need to test what we're living in. And then from there might be multiple things that we come in and add. What advice would you give to somebody first? And we're going to go through a few different things. Someone that's sick, someone that's living with the daily grind of constantly being sick. What course of action would you advise them to do?
Well, again, the first process is always going to be the testing part of it. Because again, if we don't understand what the contaminants are and the conditions, taking corrective action is simply you spending money and time. And that might make you feel good, like, hey, I did something. But it's not about just doing something, it's about doing the right things. And more importantly, or just as important, it's doing the right things in the right order. So very often I might give somebody 5 or 6 corrective action things to do. And they said, well, either due to time, money, availability, we have to do these in certain order. And so they just kind of start doing things. But as we start to share with them, you've got to do the right things in the right order. So, for example, if we're doing exhaust ventilation, where we're taking the contaminants or moisture and we're venting them to the outside, you can't just take a problem and then do something different and thinking the problem is going to go away. If we take air out of a home, we need to bring air from outside in. It's an exchange process. It's all about balance, just like life. And usually, what happens with our health? Every time our health is out of whack, it's out of function, it's because there's something that's out of balance. And your home is no different. So somebody will say, well, should I do duct cleaning? At least I'll be doing something. Or should I go out and buy an air filter? At least I would be doing something. And I get that they would be doing something. We want to make sure it's the right something and in the right order. So, for example, let's say somebody says, well, Terry, we went ahead and we bought an portable air filter because we thought that would be at least something that we're doing, and it's better than doing nothing. Well, so buying a filter is only a good thing if you know what you're trying to filter out of the air, and is that system capable of addressing those particular contaminants and conditions. So let's talk about an ordinary filter, even a HEPA filter. If you have a dust problem, you say, I want to dust less often, I want to vacuum less often. Most filters will do an okay job for that. And then you just have to figure out how many do I need and where do I place them. But if you have a microbiological problem, mold, mycotoxins, viruses, even if you captured something very effectively, in most systems, there is no mechanical functionality there to stop stuff from growing in or on the filter or stopping it from leaving the system. So when I hear, I thought it would be better than doing nothing, that would be a good example that doing the wrong thing can actually be worse than doing nothing. So that's why we not only test for the contaminants, but all of those other variables, so we can give you the right type of guidance of what to do and in what order.
Family, having their first baby, live in a new home, excited for the incoming. They've got a couple of pets, have no visible or feeling of health issues, important to test.
Absolutely, because again, you're bringing this newborn now into this home that even if it's at a toxin level that you might be able to tolerate. Now, notice I didn't say that you're going to do well and you're not going to have any health challenges. You might tolerate a child now at a small percentage of your weight is not going to be able to handle those toxins at the same level. When we look at children today and even into the teens, they're experiencing health challenges and toxin exposure health challenges at a level that we've never seen before in the past. And it's because the amount of toxins and the concentration, what might have taken you and I a lifetime to experience this situation, these children are experiencing it from sometimes at birth. In fact, the average baby at birth is having, multiple hundreds of contaminants and toxins, in their cell tissues and in their blood at birth. This is not after they're 20 and 30 years old. So if they have that exposure from being in the mother's womb and now in that home experiencing more toxins, more mold, more chemicals, we're seeing health effects that, again, you would have not seen for 40, 50, 60 years, now in single digits in their teens. I mean, how devastating is that? There's nothing that a parent would not do to get their child out of harm's way if they knew what that harm's way was. The problem is you can't protect your child against a threat if you don't know what that threat is. And so it's absolutely critical, during pregnancy. I mean, there's no home that shouldn't be tested today with the amount of exposures of toxins and the ongoing unresolved health problems. I mean, tell me today who's not having inflammation, Who's not having, issues with sleep? Who's not having, some degree of less than optimal health? It's a common day occurrence. So if we're going to help our children, we need to help them today as a baby, as a young child. Don't wait until they're 20 and 30 and they say, oh my gosh, what what what's gone on? What did we miss? Don't miss it. Check it today. But it'd be one thing if the technologies were not available to test, but it's such a powerful, powerful process that you can do in a matter of 2 days and understand what your threat and what your health risks are. It is really paramount for anybody today, but especially that of a young child.
Yeah, I think again, when we start looking at the chemicals that are in the food, we start looking at the quality of contaminants that go onto our skin, let alone what we're breathing in. And you look at our system and what it's fighting, the free radicals that we're, fighting back against, what was taken for granted still is taken for granted, and yet our system's overloaded and fight. Let me go to the other level. I've been fortunate enough to coach a lot of professional athletes, and because we're performing at a high level, we think we're okay. Is there any cases or proof that uber athletes are living in negative environments, and when they clean them out, their performance was able to go to a higher level?
Well, and it doesn't even have to be the toxin situation, just again, air in general. Why is it that a professional sports team that's going to be traveling for that game, why are they looking at the elevation in these different areas? Have a higher elevation, we're going to have less of an oxygen percentage. So they clearly know that this has a big impact. So why do they then travel to those areas several days before the game rather than just traveling there the night before or game day? Their performance is going to suffer drastically. So they get them there a few days before to acclimate to that environment. Now, that's just on oxygen percentage. Now, when we start adding in toxins, same situation. If our air is saturated with toxins, the contaminant levels go up, your oxygen percentage goes down. Once again, just from oxygen percentage, it's going to have an impact. Now, if we have toxins overloading into our blood, our cells, our tissues, I mean, you don't even, there's plenty of science out there, but just even good common sense will tell you that, again, the better the quality of the air that you have, the higher the percentage, the better you're going to do. Now, that's just for the average person. Take an athlete, which again, why do they focus on what are you eating? What supplements are you taking? How much rest are you getting? How much repair are you getting? Are we giving the body enough rest after the workouts? I mean, a percentage, 1 percentage point is the difference between an athlete that's good and an athlete that's great. Well, that same situation travels over to, again, the general population as well. So everything from a baby to the general person that's just trying to, again, make it through life, to the person that's, really struggling with ongoing health challenges, to the person that's searching for optimal health, to the athlete that's living and doing everything necessary to be at that pinnacle state. You have to factor in the quality of your air for sure.
Which again makes complete sense. Is there something though that a team could do or an athlete could do to travel with them to clean the air as best as possible? Because again, if you got to go and stay in a hotel, theoretically, you think it's a nice hotel. I'm a pro athlete. I'm being put up in the Ritz without stating a name, but with the terminology. And yet you could be in that room. There could theoretically be mold coming through the air ducts. Is there a solution that people could use to help maintain when they travel?
There is, just as much as I've been in the industry from identifying toxins. I've also got a background in designing and engineering various technologies for, helping individuals that are having these health struggles or looking for optimal. So most definitely, there are technologies that could be brought. In fact, a lot of hotels now, especially the higher end hotels, are starting to offer rooms that have these features and these options in them, and of course, charging more for them. And there's a big enough need to look at it. So yes, that would be a good thing to do to look at, hey, how can we make this individual's room or the team's room's air quality better? For sure. But just as important, you want to make sure that the air in your home where you're normally at is at optimal levels so that you can, again, not just, have a problem, do something short term, get it better, then go back to the same problem. You're on this continual, roller coaster or treadmill. And it's like, you can't expect consistent, stabilized results if you keep on taking unstabilized and inconsistent, pathways. It just doesn't work. It all boils down to balance again. If we want optimal health, then we have to do optimal things to get there.
Yeah, interesting. I think we've got so much information today, but it all boils down to the same thing. And I think if anybody has any questions, then for sure we'll be able to connect them directly to you, get more information, because I've spoken to a lot of people, but no one's been able to give me the same information and understanding that I was able to get from you. And I'm taking action. And here I am thinking and believing that I'm living a very healthy life, super athletic, feeling fit, speaking about so much, but there's so much that we can learn. But the importance is simplifying it down and taking the guesswork out. If I was to leave you with one question that I'd love you to answer now, there's one thing that you want the world to know that would affect the quality of their life within the world, what's the one thing that you would like them to know?
Test, detect, and protect. You can't have a healthy home or know that you're not living in an unhealthy home without testing. But it's not just about the testing. You have to be able to do testing to understand what is your real health risks. Then you detect where these things are happening, why are they happening? Because ultimately, that's the only way that you're going to be able to protect you and your family. So it has to be a full spectrum process. And we know that you simply cannot be healthy living in a sick home. So we've done everything in our power over this past 4+ decades to help somebody identify, to test their environment, to know, am I living in a sick house? And then giving them the understanding to, again, detect the conditions. Why are these things happening? And then our background also has allowed them to get the protection they need for them and their families to take the proper corrective actions in the right steps, in the right order, so that they can, really reach that optimal health that they're searching for. Without it, it's all guesswork. And, both your health and your money are simply too valuable to take that risk.
No, it's fantastic. I want to thank you for what you've done for my home, which is my health, and the guidance that you're currently giving me going through here. And I very much look forward to testing again to see the impact, not just on my home, but on my own physical body, testing, the blood, what's happening within the system. And obviously with my girlfriend, Vivian, as well, to see the effect that we're making, because again, it's not just living, it's quality of life. So Terry.
Well, and the other thing I share with somebody too is there's a healing time for the home and there's a healing time for the individual. And you might think, okay, my home is good today, I'm good today. But the reality is your healing time for you personally begins when the home really has reached that level. So that's why it's so important to look at both processes. You need a healthy home in order for you to get healthy. So the way to do that, test, find out what your status is, and then get on that journey to both a healthier home and a healthier you.
Fantastic. Like I said, maybe the most impacting podcast we're going to do, because everything has to come second to our environment. So I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm excited to get feedback, and thank you for all that you do for helping so many people, because I know I directly am affected by all that you do. So thank you.
Been my pleasure, and thank you for what you do to get that message out there. Thank you.
When you get your skin exposed to sunlight, your serotonin and your dopamine goes up, so that's why you feel better. And since I like the benefits, I started doing the 2-3 times per week. You have the visible light, On one end, you have the infrared that's invisible to your eyes, and that's the biggest part of the sunlight. And then you have a little part of sunlight that's called the UV. What was discovered just in recent years is that only 5% of the melatonin is produced in your pineal gland. The other 95% is produced on your skin. We really need infrared as any other nutrient. The same as we need vitamin C, the same as we need protein, we really need sunlight in order to. So want to get younger, want to get more melatonin, get more